Hey everyone, and welcome to Prune Insiders. I'm your host, Michael Adams. Today we got a special guest. Everyone, welcome Sean Mulligan.
Hey, Mikey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Not too bad.
So, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Sean Mulligan. I'm a 46-year-old survivor. I live in Philadelphia, married. My wife and I get together. She had three little kids who were 9, 8. Youngest was going on 7. So we got together in '08, and we've been together since.
That's good. So, why don't you start off from the beginning and tell us, when did your parents find out you had prune belly?
So, being the fact I was born in '75, back then they weren't doing ultrasounds. So I didn't find out, my parents didn't find out I was prune belly until actually I was already sent home. The doctor was like, "Oh no, he's fine. He'll be okay." But then my parents were worried because I wasn't eating, I wasn't urinating, so they took me over to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia after a couple of days. No, not after a couple of days, but after I was already born. So it wasn't until a few days after I was born that I was diagnosed. And then once I was diagnosed, the doctors decided to tell my parents, "Don't name him, don't get attached. He's not going to be around that long."
Wow. Uh, that's rough.
Yeah, so on top of the fact that I was born with the umbilical cords wrapped around my neck, had to have my heart shocked a few times to get it started. So I definitely had a rocky start from the beginning.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was actually born with the umbilical cord wrapped around mine too, and the doctor said it was tied in an actual knot. You had
Trying to
to
show off a
actually
little
untie
tire.
it. So, what's your earliest memory with prune belly?
Uh, well, unfortunately, I don't have really a great memory, but I do have some things I do remember. Unfortunately, some of my stories that I do recall aren't necessarily the greatest. So unfortunately, one memory that always stood out, I remember being 7 years old. I was in bed, it was late at night, getting ready to fall asleep for school, and I was in bed hysterically crying. I'm basically praying to be taken out of this world because I was 7 years old, and it was just the pain, the aches and pains I had every day, the constant hospitalizations, getting picked on a little bit in school and in the neighborhood I was in. So there was a lot of things that was going on that unfortunately had me feel that way. And when I woke up the next morning, I was disappointed because I really was ready uh, to go. It's unfortunately at 7 years old, I already understood my own mortality. I understood that I probably may not have a long life, so I had already accepted it. So it was like at 7 years old, I'm like, all right, I'm done.
Wow, that's really rough.
Yeah, that's pretty intense for 7 years old. Yeah.
But I think almost every prune belly's been through that. What advice would you give a prune belly who wants to give up?
Well, the thing I would definitely say is it is very difficult life with prune belly. Sometimes it is more difficult than others. But one thing to do is there's always at least one thing to keep going for. There's always something, whether it be family members or whether you have pets, just if you have dreams or goals or aspirations, there is truly always something to keep going for. It's just for each person it's different, and you may not even know why you're fighting, what you're fighting for, but in the end, it just I can never give up. It's just not in me.
Yeah, everything will eventually work itself out.
And I mean, unfortunately, it may not, but it's just you just got to keep that fight going. It's worth it.
Yeah. So, why don't you continue your story a little bit?
Okay, so much like I was saying with the aches and pains I had, so I was born with prune belly, but also I was born with chronic kidney disease. I was born with one kidney working, the other kidney wasn't working at all. So at an early age, the doctors had told my parents that if he does have a long life or any type of life, he will need a transplant. Now, my parents were told many times that I wasn't going to survive. They told my parents I wouldn't walk, talk, be able to go to school. And my parents were told so many times I wouldn't make it through the night that around 2 or 3 years old, I actually had a burial suit. that I ended up wearing for Easter one year. So I had headaches, stomach aches, leg pains, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I had that first transplant at 14. Because of the issues I had, I also had trouble with growth. I was extremely small for my height, which, we all know kids are cruel. So which led to me being picked on even more so because of my height. I always struggled to keep up with my friends, but I never wanted anyone to know I was sick or that I was different, because that was the biggest thing, is I didn't want to be different. And although in my mind I always felt different, and even till this day I still feel different, I still don't want anybody to know that. So I still played sports. Even though I was feeling the pains I had, I forced myself to do what I could do every day. Like, whether I play sports, going to school was very difficult because of, imagine having headaches similar to migraines, constant stomach aches, leg pains, things that kept me up at night. I was still doing everyday life with those aches and pains.
Wow.
So, but I mean, it wasn't all doom and gloom. It was, I was, like I said, I was still playing sports. I was still active, so it was the pros and cons. It was, the uphill battle that I had.
Now, growing up, did any of your friends, were they even aware you had prune belly?
Some knew that I had something called prune belly, but it was because of most of my issues truly related to the kidney. Most people just knew I actually had kidney problems because of it. It was like, oh, I'm not feeling well. It seemed like the kidney was the main thing that most people knew about. Even my close friends, they didn't know about prune belly. They didn't know how serious it was. Adults around me, my teachers, no one knew how serious prune belly was. They just knew, oh, I had kidney problems. So, I had my first kidney transplant at 14. We definitely had a lot of complications. Ended up staying in the hospital longer than the normal 10 days. I went home after 10 days and was back in. And so it was definitely a rocky start. Those first 14 years were a nightmare.
If you don't mind me asking, can I ask what type of complications happened?
Your urinary tract infections, the aches and pains. There was times I would go to the hospital and they wouldn't know what was wrong. So they would just send me home. I remember being at a young age, like early grade school age, and it was on a weekend. It was like probably a Friday or Saturday night, and in the middle of the night, I was laying on the floor because I would sleep downstairs on the weekend sometimes, where my dad, he would be on the couch, and I had this excruciating pain, kind of in like the groin area, to the point where I couldn't even walk. I couldn't put any pressure on my legs. Went to the hospital. My dad carried me into the wheelchair and everything, and got in there, spent some time in the hospital, a few days in the hospital. They never knew what was causing the pains. So it was just a lot of little things.
All right.
And when you're in kidney failure, you dehydrate a lot. I had a lot of bouts with pneumonia. So it was just a lot of little things that I was always in the hospital for.
All right. So, how many friends did you have many friends during that time as well, or?
I mean, I had a few friends. I had people who knew me, people who knew of me. So, back then when I was that age, I still had, some kids that I hung around with. We played sports. We were friends. So yeah, I mean, I did have friends back then.
All right.
It just wasn't easy making friends or having friends, because I was friends with kids where I was the same age as their brother, but because of being, picked on a little bit or just being my height, their younger brothers were my height. They were so much bigger.
Wow.
It was, yeah. So I mean, I had friends growing up, but I still always felt different.
All right. So, let's continue your story a little bit.
Okay, so after having the first transplant, like I said, I was home in 10 days. Went back in to the hospital a few days later. And then I was in for probably about a month and a half with rejection, and it was very serious rejection. That to the point where, like I didn't know what was going to happen next. But after those first month and a half, I was out of the hospital. It was just a slow recovery. The The one thing when I was talking about my height, to show how small I was, right before I had that first transplant, at 14 years old, I was 4'6" and 66 pounds as a freshman in high school, just to give an example of how short I was. So with the transplant, it was a very tough recovery. So that first year, I didn't really go to school that much. But one thing that was most interesting about that was leading up to the transplant. One day, the doctors came into my hospital room at 14. My parents aren't even there yet, and they're like, "So, you need your kidneys, failing, as you know, and you either need to have a transplant or go into dialysis." So I was like, "Okay, well, let's do the transplant." Just like that, like there was no worry. So leading up to the transplant, I had a social worker who came in the room every day saying, "Oh, why aren't you afraid?" I was like, "Because it's just another surgery. I had other surgeries. It's no different." But so that first year was rough. Not only was it rough physically, but it was rough mentally.
Yeah.
Because your body goes through all these changes. You get the moon face. I literally had hair on my entire face to the point where my dad actually got a razor and shaved from my forehead to my eyebrows because I had hair where you couldn't see my hairline to my eyebrows. He shaved it. Luckily, the hair didn't come back. So there's a lot of little things that were going on with that recovery. That transplant lasted about 4 years, and it failed because I wasn't careful enough with my medicine. You're 14, you don't realize the severity or what you're going through or what's going on. So by the time I'm 16 and 17 and 18, I'm going out, I'm staying out later. So I take my medicine at 9 in the morning, but then might not take the next dose until 1 in the morning, or I'd fall asleep and forget to take it. So that first one, it didn't work because I wasn't careful enough.
All right. Now, how about relationship wise? Have you had, other than your wife, have you had any relationships through the years in high school and college and stuff like that?
I I did. The funny part was because I was so small, the best way to explain it was I was almost like a little teddy bear. It's I would be so much smaller than everybody. So it was like, oh, look how cute, I have blue eyes and everything. So growing up until high school, dating for us, where I grew up in Philadelphia, was, you and a girl would go up a driveway and kiss for whatever, however long. That was what was considered a date back then. So from like fifth to eighth grade, I did, kiss a few girls and have little mini girlfriends, as you could say. But the interesting part is my wife was actually someone that I had dated for about a little over a year on and off. Like I said, kind of like the little driveway thing. But
Yeah.
so when I was in the hospital with the first transplant, and like I said, I was in there longer than I should have been. She would call me at night, and her and I would talk for a while. Her mom wouldn't let her come up to see me, because you don't know what's going on, and yeah, so we talked a lot. And so when I came out of the hospital, we continued to stay in contact, and we dated for a little longer, and we just stayed close, for years.
That's good.
So yeah,
Now,
dating is something I did up until now. The interesting part was once I had the first transplant, I became a little more insecure about my looks and my height and everything. So I started dating a little less as I got into high school. I have girlfriends here and there. College, I dated a couple different girls. Nothing serious, like a month here, a month there, nothing long term. But it's interesting with my wife because while we were in college, we went on a double date with a friend of mine who's dating her friend. So it was weird with my wife. It's like we dated when we were younger. Now here we are a few years later, while we're in college, and then we go out on another date. And so it's kind of like we just always seem to have some sort of connection.
all right. Now, obviously, you said she knew about the kidney transplant, right?
Yes.
How long before she knew about the actual prune belly syndrome?
She didn't know about Prune Belly until her and I got back in touch in 2006. We lost touch completely. The only way we got back in touch was because my older sister was living in Hawaii, and her sister went on vacation to meet her cousin who was living in Hawaii. My sister was also friends with her cousin. So one night, the three of them are out to dinner, And when my sister says what her last name is, my wife's sister's like, oh, my sister used to date somebody named Sean Mulligan. It's like, oh yeah, that's my brother. So her sister called my wife and was like, guess who I'm having dinner with? And it's like, who? So it's kind of was like, well, wow, that kind of out like it's just strange how, and they never met each other. Like my sister and her sister never knew each other or anything. So it was just a weird way. So we got back in touch because my wife, I always joke and say she stalked me. She went on the yellow pages, found my number, and called me. And I was in a relationship at the time, so her and I just, we stayed friends and talked for, a couple of years. I was in the other relationship. So when I started talking to her, I opened up about Prune Belly, and so she looked it up online to find out more information about it. So since day one, she's been on board and really she gets involved with the conventions and things of that nature. So she's definitely since once I said Prune Belly, she immediately started asking questions and looking it up.
Now, have you been going to the conventions every year they've had it? Well, since you found out about the network?
Once I found out about the conventions, I've won the last 3. So it's and the first convention I went to was in New Jersey. I believe that was 2015. When I walked into the room, it's a room with just transplant families, not transplant, Prune Belly families and survivors. I was 39 years old at the time. It was the first time in my entire life where I finally felt comfortable. Like I finally felt like I found a place where I belong, where I fit in. Just it was like a place where I was meant to be. Because even growing up as a kid, I always felt different, even in my own house with my parents and sisters, because of I was the sick one, I was the small one, I had these issues, and my parents would tell me like, growing up, you didn't complain to us like you were sick or things like that. I'm like, it's because I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to feel different. So I kind of just kept up to myself.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that convention was a big change in my life.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard part about Prune Belly is feeling different, but
right. Not only with Prune Belly, but just growing up, there was one other, unfortunately, young child who had kidney issues that I knew, but no one else I knew around me was sick. Everybody, they had their little minor things here and there. So, when you're the only sick one, like for me, I truly felt like I just didn't belong with this group of people.
Yeah.
So that convention was definitely the turning point in my life.
That's good. So, how many survivors have you personally talked with and got to know?
Oh wow, talked with. Ooh, I couldn't even put a number on that. The amazing thing is, when I was born, doctors told my parents, "You won't find anybody with Prune Belly. Your son's the only one." So my whole life, I fought alone. I felt like it was just me against the world. And then I come across the Prune Belly page by accident. One night I'm sitting down watching TV, and I'm like, everything's on Facebook. Even things that shouldn't be on Facebook's on Facebook. So let me look and see if Prune Belly's on there. And so when I found the page, I was shocked. So since then, I've talked to people and personally met people from Canada, Brazil, Mexico. I've talked to somebody from India. We've talked to people from Africa. I've literally talked to people from all over the world, which just still amazes me. So I can't even put a number on it, but I am fortunate enough. Like you and I, we've spent some time together. I have a couple close friends also with Prune Belly. It's just I never thought I'd see the day where that would happen. It's an amazing feeling.
All right. So I know you said you went to college. What were you studying?
Well, so the only reason why I went to college was because, I'm in high school and I don't know what to do with my life. So I just graduate. I'm like, what do I do now? Now, the reason why I didn't know what to do in my life was because with Prune Belly and having the transplants, I knew how serious it wasn't that high. So for me, my goal in life was never to be a doctor, a lawyer, a hockey player, or anything. My goal in life was to be 16 years old. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up, was 16 years old, because I didn't think it was going to happen. So
Wow.
when I turned 16 years old, and I'm like, I didn't prepare for the future because I didn't think I'd have one. So I'm like, well, what do I like to do? What do I want to do? And with my parents, they never pushed me to try to do things. They were like, we'll do it for you, or because they didn't know, it's very difficult raising a child who's sick. And so, like, there was never a prepare for the future type thing. So I only went to college because I didn't know what else to do. So the first year I just took general studies. Then I thought about maybe doing pharmacy. So I did a semester of pre-pharm classes. The problem with that was I couldn't have done it at the time. I wasn't ready. I just had my second transplant at 18 years old. Right after my first semester, I had to have the second transplant. With the second transplant, I had so many complications that I was in the hospital for like two and a half straight months without going home. It was so bad they thought that they were going to have to send me to Pittsburgh for a special medication. And that point was the most difficult point in my life. Because of all the complications I was having, the mental health got even worse then.
Yeah.
So, I mean, mentally, I wasn't prepared to start college again, but yet, not only did I start college again, I went for the hardest courses, and I wasn't mentally prepared for that. I didn't have a successful semester, so then I'm like, all right, what will I do now? So then I thought, well, maybe I'll go into child psychology because I figured I can help so many kids because of with all I've been through, I can relate better than somebody who just read something from a book. I had first-hand experience of what it's like to live through difficult times as a child. So I started taking courses for that. And then when I went to the advisor and I told him, okay, I want to go into child psychology, he's like, oh, well, they're a dime a dozen. You should pick something else. Now, any other time in my life, if somebody would have said that to me, I would have kept going. I'm like, no, you know what? This is what I want. But at the time, I was going through such a difficult time mentally that I was just like, oh, okay. So after that semester, I was like, all right, what do I want to do next? Then I thought about maybe doing teaching, did a semester of courses related to that. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was really at a low point in my life. So eventually, after two and a half years of college, I ended up getting a job, my first full-time job at 19. Somebody my dad worked with, his wife was looking for someone to work in their office for billing, physician billing. So I was like, you know what? School's just not for me. So I took it, and I've been working full time ever since I was 19.
Wow.
But to explain and describe the mental health issue, it was always serious. So, for example, like when I was 16 years old, I had a suicide note. I didn't have an idea of how I was going to do it, but I had the note. I was, so I was always prepared for, my life to end early. But it was just with that second transplant, though, that truly, I don't know if I've ever really fully recovered from that because of how difficult of a time I had with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I started working at 19 worked for a hospital doing billing. I was there for about a year, and then I moved to New Jersey and was working in a hospital there for about 11 years, 12 years, and then I moved back to Philadelphia where I'm at now.
All right. So, what would you say is the hardest part of living with Prune belly?
For me personally, the mental health was truly the most difficult. It was hard having the aches and the pains physically, but as a kid, no matter how bad the aches and pains are, or what surgery I had, or what medical procedure I had, in my mind I was always like, oh, it's just another surgery, it's just another procedure, another hospital stay. But what I didn't realize, and what other people around me didn't realize, is you don't understand how much of a mental toll it takes. It's tough physically, but the mental part is more difficult because it's basically you're going through trauma with each and every time, even if you don't realize it when you're going through it. So for me, now I'm 46, and I've had many years and different cases of issues with the mental health side. Like I've had 3 kidney transplants. The second transplant failed after 4 years because of a misdiagnosis by a doctor. I did dialysis for 21 months. Had my third transplant in the year 2000. So in April, it will be 20 years since my third transplant.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's not common for, uh, especially the fact that it was a cadaver for to last that long. But yeah, I'm just, I mean, I've been lucky my whole life. It's although it's been difficult with what I've been through, it's you know, I never was one to just sit there and not do anything. Like as a kid, I played sports. When I went into high school, I ended up playing ice hockey for the high school team for 2 years. I wasn't good, but I played, and I played with so much heart that my senior year for the JV team, I had the assistant captain. So it's just because of I could never just sit. I could never give up. I always had to keep going and find ways to push myself, and so that's definitely been something that's helped me get through it. But yeah, the mental aspect definitely is by far the worst part for me.
Yeah. So, do you have any siblings?
I have two older siblings. My older sister, she's 4 years older than me. My other sister, she's 16 months older than me.
All right. And how would you describe your relationship with them?
It was growing up. It was a normal, typical, older sister relationship in some ways. Now, my one sister, being that she was 4 years older, you know, 4 years doesn't sound like a lot, but with 4 years, it's so when I'm four, she's eight. So it's like she was around, but it wasn't like she was around all the time in that way. But so she was like the big sister, like she'd take me to the mall occasionally or just go places. Where me and my sister, who's 16 months apart, we were always together at, because of the age. So you're growing up together, even closer, in that age range. So you're playing games together, you're doing different things together. So the relationship with the older sister was that big sister. I'll take you places. I'll look after you. I mean, my sister, who's 16 months older than me, there were times where she did stick up for me when I was getting bullied with things. So they both had different roles growing up. The way it kind of worked out.
That's good. Sounds like they're always there for you.
I mean, they live far away, and the relationship at times isn't the greatest, but in the end I know that if something came up and I needed something, that they would always be there. Like I know for a fact, they both wanted to give the transplant. They want to give a kidney and things like that, and so like I said, like things I do know that they would always be there if I needed something. So even if the relationship was rocky, I know that they would be there for me.
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
So, uh, why don't is there anything else with your story? Why don't we continue a little bit?
So I mentioned I was on dialysis for 21 months. When I found out the second transplant had failed, and the doctor was like, "Okay, you're going to need dialysis," and I never wanted dialysis. I knew what dialysis was. I had heard some stories, so in my mind, I was like, "I will never do dialysis." I was, I was 100% against it. I looked at it as like, you know what? If my life's meant to end today, I lived longer than I expected. I lived longer than the doctors expected. I've done more than other people I know that are healthy. So I'm like, if it's my time, it's my time. So it was basically about a year after the doctor told me that the second transplant failed. About a year later, I had been feeling good for about a week. Eventually, I was able to get a doctor's appointment. The day of the appointment, I left work early because I was not feeling good at all. I went home, slept for a little bit. I came out of the room and said to my dad, because I was still living at home at the time, "Can you take me to the ER?" He was like, "But you have a doctor's appointment soon." I was like, "I'm not going to make it." The hospital I went to was the one I worked at, and it was probably, with no exaggeration, it was 8 minutes from my house. Walking to the ER, and they say, "What is your name?" Luckily, there was a wheelchair right next to me, and they were able to grab it in time because I actually collapsed.
Wow.
Um, at that point, I began to fade in and out of consciousness. They got my information and they took me back into the room. My blood pressure was around 250 over like almost like 180, roughly. Like it was extremely high, still fading in and out of consciousness. The one doctor comes in. My doctor wasn't around at the time, so another nephrologist comes in and he says to me, he was like, Sean, he's like, unfortunately, you know what's going on, you know what's happening. You need dialysis. And so as I'm still fading in and out of consciousness, I was like, no. He was like, you know the consequences, right? I was like, so, and faded away. Like I started, again, continuing to pass in and out, and like he was going over different things, and then I was coming up with stories. I'm like, well, I can get a kidney from someone. I was like, I'm not doing dialysis. I refuse. I was like, yeah. I was like, I didn't, I was like, I don't care what happens. And he left. Throughout the night, I started to lose control of my insides, my bowels, everything just coming out. Uh, I later found out from my parents, my mom and dad. They told my parents that I might not make it through the night, that my heart may give out, or I may have a stroke. But I did make it through the night. And even though I never said the words, that next morning, I started dialysis, which was July 1st of 2000. And I was on dialysis for 21 months until I got the transplant. So I was on dialysis from 24 to 26 years old. Part of the reason why I never wanted to do dialysis was 2 weeks prior to doing dialysis, I was still active. I was still playing roller hockey. I was still out and about. I wasn't somebody who was just sitting at home. And I always said I'd rather, go out as someone who's active and have living life than someone not doing anything. So, and the dialysis, it was rough. In the first month and a half, I passed out a couple times and had to be rushed to the hospital. It was definitely, took its toll on my body. But then after that, it was all mental. Like it was just a physical. If the physical was a little tough, but it was physically draining, but more mentally difficult because I'm a 24, 25-year-old guy on dialysis. It's not a life to live. So actually, while on dialysis, I started writing poetry.
All right.
That's my outlet. So
So,
it was a difficult time, but then 26 years old, I got after the seventh call I received from University of Penn, they said, "Come in, we may have your transplant." So got the call at like four in the morning. Got to the hospital at 5, and got the transplant.
that's good. So, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what is your mental state today? Are you stable? Or...
For the last, I'd say, at least 3 years, I'm finally at the best point of my life. I mean, I would say the first couple years, my wife and I, we got together. Probably, especially that first year, was probably the best mentally I'd been in my life because things seemed to be going in the right direction. But then, a couple things happened, and so I went back mentally. But I'd say the last few, maybe 3 years or so, I'm probably in the best mental state since that point. I have a clearer head with. I don't dwell on the things like I used to. I don't think about what could have been or. But one thing I've never done is I've never blamed my health for where I am in life. I've always blamed my decisions. Although it had an impact, in the end, there's probably things maybe I could have done differently. That maybe I would have had a better job or been more successful in different things. But yeah, so like the last I'd say 3 years or so, I finally feel better mentally than I have in my life.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it's I don't know, and I don't know how it happened. I can't say to someone who's going through it saying, "Oh well, what did you do to change your mental aspect?" There was no one thing. It just over slowly. It was like, okay, I've had one good day in a row. Okay, I've had 2 good days. When I say have good days, I don't mean things didn't go wrong, or it was just if something went wrong, it didn't affect me. It was just like, so what? It was just a bad day. Where before, if I had a bad day, it would be like, oh no, it's the end of the world. So it was slow baby steps.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, finally in a good place.
All right. So, is there anything else with your story you would like to share?
I mean, it's funny because there's so much involved, uh, and I mean, I don't want everybody to think, doom and gloom, because I know a lot of stuff I've talked about has been bad. But the takeaway from that is too is it's although I've said how difficult it was, I played sports as a kid, which it's for me. I always tell parents when I do talk to the families, let your child be as independent as possible. Like I know some children will have not the same capabilities. I mean, let's face it, if you can't walk, you can't walk. But let your child do as many things for themselves as possible, because when they get older, they're going to feel more independent. Like for me, my parents tried to do so much for me, which was great because I needed it in some ways. But then it's like there's other things where, like, even now as an adult, I'm a little leery of trying something new because when I was younger, my parents were like, "Oh, no, no, you don't try that," or don't, So they were supportive in some ways, but in other ways, it was just like, just let me do it, let me try it, because then, maybe as an adult, I would be a little bit more willing to go and give something new a try. So independence is definitely key. Let your child be an individual as much as possible.
Well, it's funny that you say that because the pediatric hospital I went to, uh, had this clinic where they would talk mainly to the patient first and go through his medications with him, see what's wrong, do the whole appointment with him, privately without the parents in the room. And they would start this at 16 to prepare them to transfer from pediatric care over to adult care and kind of give them that independence and responsibility that they might need to build.
Yeah, and that's great. It's the most difficult thing for a child, even a healthy child, is to transition into adulthood. But then when you're somebody who has these illnesses, that transition can be really difficult, because not only do you have to get a job and do all these other things, you also have to learn how to take care of yourself. So if you're not independent and you can't do some of the little things, it's going to take longer, or if possible, you may never have that independence. So that's definitely important.
Yeah,
Very important.
definitely got to prepare your kids for adulthood and honestly prepare them for what's coming to them in the world when they get older, too.
I mean, you got to do the best you can. It is
Yeah,
tough because, I mean, I know everyone's situation is different. Like you and I, we're in a different situation where I know some children, unfortunately, it's devastating when I see this posts with how sick some of the children are.
yeah,
Sometimes, especially how they could be fine and not going through anything, and then next thing you know, they're in a life or death situation. Um, and doctors are telling parents, "Oh, abort because they're going to have no quality of life." And so when they do have the children, you have that fear of what's going what you have the fear of the unknown. You
yeah,
don't know how what's going to happen, how sick your child's going to get, and it's very hard to prepare because you're preparing yourself as a parent. You're preparing yourself that your child may not be there tomorrow. But I mean, I always do emphasize the mental aspect, because you're so worried as the parent keeping your child alive that that's all you're thinking about. And in talking to some parents, I mean, I've even had one parent come up to me like, say, Sean, if you didn't mention at the convention about your mental health, I would have never thought about it. I asked my son, and he was like, yeah, I'd like to see somebody. If I didn't mention it at all, if I never brought it up at the convention, she would have never went to her son and said, do you want to see someone?
yeah.
And I know there's other parents who've said the same thing to me. So that's why I make sure to emphasize it. So I don't want to seem like it's a negative thing to have, like prune belly and all. It is bad, but you can go on. I mean, I just turned 46 last month.
That's great.
I've played hockey, baseball, basketball, football. I've been skydiving. I've flown Cessna airplanes for about a year. I didn't get a pilot's license, but I did that. When I was in grade school, me and my sister, we drove the little race cars. Like, so I've done so many things in life. When I worked at the hospital uh, down the shore where I lived, I was employee of the month and then employee of the year. So I've had all these things that I've done. And so, yeah, so maybe I'm not where I want to be in adulthood, but it's still like I didn't just sit there and let life pass me by. I mean, there's things that I wish I would have done. There's things I missed out on because of my own mental health. But in the end, like when I really look back, I've accomplished quite a bit for someone who had to go through what I went through.
Yeah.
And look, and it's just I'm going to keep going, and it's I may be gone, I may die by the end of this thing here. I may live another 50 years, but no matter what, it's just I'm always going to fight. I've never given up a day in my life. I felt like it a million and one times, but I just keep fighting.
And that's something I've seen in common with almost every, actually, I take the almost back, every survivor I've met.
Right. Yeah. It's because you don't know any different. I always say to people, it's easier to be born with an illness and go than being someone who's been healthy for a number of years and then all of a sudden be hit with something. Because for you and I and other survivors, we always learn to adjust to what we have to adjust to.
Yeah.
It may be difficult, it may be a struggle, but when you look at it, every one of us, we've just adjusted to what we've had to adjust to. And much like I told the social worker when I had right before the first transplant, it's another procedure, it's another surgery. I've been through it before, and I look back at back now, and it's like, yeah, there were some things different, but still, in the end, we're going to adjust. If we have to change our diet, if we have to change, how we live in general, we're always going to make the adjustments we have to make.
Yeah.
Where if you're healthy, and all of a sudden you're hit with something, it's such a devastating thing to deal with because you're on cloud nine because you're healthy and you're not thinking anything. Then you're hit and you're knocked down to cloud zero. That's a bigger fall than for you and I. You and I, it's there's sometimes we feel cloud we're not cloud zero. So when something else comes up, it hurts us and it might be devastating in some ways, but it's easier for us to figure out a way to just adjust to it and make it work and keep going. And that's something I'll always do. I'll always find a way to just adjust and make it work and keep on going.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is, we're here and we inspire people. And that's what we do. We don't even realize it, but that's what we do.
Yep, that's amazing. So I think I got about one more question for you, and that's if the viewers have any questions about your story, would you be willing to come back and tell more?
I'd be willing to come back. They can email me. I'll give my number. I will always be there for the families with Prune Belly. The biggest reason is because I grew up and I always felt alone. I never want another family member, another child, parents, any aunts, uncles, cousins, any of them. I never want them to feel like there's no one out there that they can talk to. We may not all have the same medical ailments because of Prune Belly, because that's what Prune Belly is. You have the major components, and then there's so many other things you can have. So I may not be able to share that and relate in that regard, but there are other ways I can relate. So I will always be an open book, and I will always be there for any Prune Belly family. So yeah. So any time anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'm always there.
That's amazing.
I mean, that's the most important thing to me right now is just being able to be there for other families so they don't feel alone also.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, all right. So any last words before we wrap up here?
No, I mean, I covered, I answered questions and I added some extra things. I mean, I know there's a lot more I can add, but I mean, I don't want to take, all day on doing this. But yeah.
How about this? You can come back on for another video later on.
Like you said just a moment ago, I'm always here for everybody, and I'll always be able to, answer questions. I'm an open book. Maybe one day I'll do a book or maybe just do a documentary or something because, it's a lot to, take up time for 46 years worth of life. So I definitely want to do more and be more involved and get my message out there and my story out there too. So, I really appreciate you doing this. This is big for everybody.
Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you and everyone else helping me out. You've all been a big help. And that's including to you guys too, the viewers. All right. So if anyone wants to reach out to me just to talk privately or to be on the show, my phone number will be in the description below. My Facebook will be in the description below. I'll leave a link to our new theme song, Not the Only One, written by Frank Walker. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. Let's try to get prune belly awareness out there. Let's try to get this trending. Hashtag prune belly or hashtag prune belly awareness. Tune in next time, and I'll see you next time.
For a long time, I seemed unique from a very early age, asking why, feeling weak, living within a cage, wondering if I am the only one.
What was I supposed to make of my limitations? How much more should I take of this situation? Can it be I am the only one?
The only one. The only one.
All throughout, I found out what love's about, leaving no doubt I'll survive. Channel the drive, not deprived. Feel alive.
Do you know how it feels to be different? At times you think you are the only one who exists with the pain of not being the same. When you got brothers and sisters that don't share the same last name or share the same blood, but share the same battle. Some days are real good, some days are just a hassle. Operations to doctor visit, you are not alone. So I wrote this to let you know you don't have to be alone.
The only one.
You don't have to be
The only one.
These days, there are ways through the haze to sing His praise. We gather here, with prayers held dear, wanting to erase all pain, death, and fear. Lord, please help them see. No one seems to have heard just how this came to be. We need to spread the word.
Show the world I'm not the only one. No, no. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for this community. Thank you, Lord, for the thread we share. Thank you, Lord, for this unity. Thank you, Lord, for the power of care. Thank you,
The
Lord.
Prune Belly Syndrome Network is a volunteer organization devoted to patient support and education of the medical community about this rare condition.
1 in 40,000 live births result in prune belly syndrome, and all of them have all or some of their abdominal muscles missing.
50% will not survive their second birthday.
Our goal is to change the medical profession's perception of prune belly syndrome as a hopeless condition
and to educate and promote an interest among the community to do further research into the causes of the syndrome
and more effective treatments.
www.prunebelly.org.
You can help.
Thank you, Lord, for this community. Thank you, Lord, for the thread we share. Thank you, Lord, for this unity. Thank you, Lord, for the power of care. Thank you, Lord, for showing me
don't know what Prune Belly is, please go to www.prunebelly.org